In this video, we'll talk about Python as a programming language and how you can leverage generative AI tools such as ChatGPT, Google Bard, and Microsoft Bing Chat to learn Python. But first, what exactly is Python? Python is a high level, versatile, and interpreted programming language known for its simplicity and readability. Code in Python is so intuitive and easy to write that Python is often considered to be the preferred programming language for beginners. You might be confused by what I mean when I say Python is an interpreted programming language. All that means is that the Python interpreter that translates your Python code into machine code so that it can be executed on your machine does so line by line. It doesn't do your entire program in one go. We'll talk a little more about that in a bit. Now, why might you choose to learn Python? Well, first, if you're a newbie, Python is a great language for beginners, but Python is also a great language for web development, data analysis, machine learning, scientific computing, and automation. You can see that it's used in a variety of domains. If you know Python, you'll be able to work on projects in all of these domains. Let's discuss some of the features that make the Python programming language very useful. Python syntax is designed to be clear and concise, making it accessible for beginners and experienced programmers alike. Python is very easy for anyone to learn and read. Secondly, Python can be run cross platform. Python is available on all platforms, including Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. This cross platform compatibility allows developers to write code that can run on different operating systems without having to change their code. When you code in Python, you don't have to write everything from scratch. Python comes with a vast standard library that provides modules and packages for various tasks, from file handling and regular expressions to network programming and web development. Python is a dynamically typed language, which means you don't need to declare variable types explicitly. The interpreter, which actually converts your code to machine language, determines the variable type at runtime, making the language flexible, but this also requires you to code carefully. Python supports not just primitive data types such as string, floats, integers, and booleans, but also high level data types such as lists, dictionaries, sets, and tuples with simplified data manipulation and storage. And Python has a large and active community of developers, which means you have a large number of libraries, frameworks, and resources available for all of the different domains in which you may want to use Python. Now, I'd mentioned earlier that Python is an interpreted language. Let's understand the nuances of what this means. When you write code in, say, C++ or Java, there is something called the compiler, which is just a program which looks through your entire code and translates your code into machine language that the computer can understand. With Python, this is not how things work. There is no compilation phase or no compiler which converts your entire code into machine language. Instead, the Python interpreter looks at your code one line at a time when your code is actually being executed. The interpreter reads and parses your code at execution time and generates the machine code for the computer, which means that your execution is in a line by line manner. Only when you execute a line of code is that code translated from Python to machine language by the interpreter and then run on your computer. Now, Python's dynamic typing that we spoke of earlier is made possible by the interpreter. The interpreter can determine the data type of a variable at runtime because it examines each statement as it's executed. The use of the interpreter and dynamic typing makes it possible for you to do interactive development in Python. And this is what we'll be using with Jupyter notebooks when we actually run code. Interactive development allows you to write code and test it right away, making Python great for prototyping. And since Python is interpreted, it can run on different platforms without you having to modify your code. Any code that you write in Python will run on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. Python supports object oriented programming. Python allows you to define classes which are templates for creating objects Objects are instances of classes and they encapsulate data and behavior. Classes and objects are used to model entities in the real world. Python supports inheritance, where a new class can inherit properties and methods from an existing class. Python supports polymorphism, where objects of different classes can be treated as objects of a common base class containing common properties. Python supports encapsulation and abstraction. Every class can define private members and private methods which should not be called outside of the class, thus abstracting users of that class from internal implementation details. In addition to object oriented programming support, Python also supports functional programming with first class functions. Functions in Python are first class citizens just like other data types, which means that functions can be stored in variables, passed as input arguments to other functions, and returned as values from other functions. Python also supports anonymous functions known as lambdas, which are small inline functions that can be used for short, simple operations. Python supports list comprehensions, which are a concise way to create lists and even sets and dictionaries based on existing lists or other iterable objects. And finally, Python has great support for immutable data structures such as tuples and frozen sets. Immutability allows you to write functions with no side effects, functions that do not change any of the input arguments that you pass into them. Early on in this video, I'd mentioned that Python was very versatile. Here are some libraries that you can use for web development in Python. Libraries such as Django and Flask help you build web applications and allow you to do server side scripting and handling HTTP requests and responses. If you're interested in data analysis and visualization, the Pandas library is great for data manipulation. Matplotlib, Seaborn, and Plotly are great for visualizations. If you're interested in machine learning and AI, frameworks such as scikit-learn are great for traditional ML models, and TensorFlow and PyTorch help you build and train deep learning models. Python support for scientific computing include libraries such as NumPy to work with multidimensional arrays and SciPy for scientific research and simulations. That's all I'm going to say about Python here. Let's talk about how we'll be learning Python in this learning path using prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is just the process of structuring text that can be interpreted and understood by a generative AI model. Any request or query that you type into ChatGPT, Google Bard, or Microsoft's Bing Chat, well, that's an example of a prompt. Generative AI refers to the ability of machine learning models to generate or create data of the kind that it has seen before during its training process. Generative AI is powered by very large models called foundation models that are trained on huge data sets. And generative AI can perform many tasks out of the box: question answering, summarization, classification, code generation, debugging, you name it. Prompt engineering refers to how you communicate with text to text generative AI models. Text to text models are models that accept a text as an input and produce some text as a response. Prompt engineering is enabled by in context learning, that is, the ability of a generative AI model to learn from the information that you've provided as a part of your prompt. A prompt is just natural language text that you specify in English or any other language describing the task that you want the model to perform, whether it's a question that you want answered or a text that you want summarized. If you're working with a text to image or text to audio model, the prompt defines the kind of output that you want. The prompt might describe the kind of image or audio that you want the model to generate. Prompt engineering is extremely useful for developers because generative AI models are great at coding related tasks. You can use Gen AI to generate code, to debug code that you've written, and it does so very well. Explain code that you might have so that you get a simple natural language explanation of what the code does. Prompt engineering can be used to improve the performance of your code or even convert code between languages, such as from Java to Python, C Sharp to Python, anything. As you're learning Python in this learning path, you'll use prompt engineering to write code using code generation prompts. You'll understand code with explanation prompts and you'll fix issues using debugging prompts. Now, I'll primarily be using ChatGPT as my generative AI assistant, but I'll also be using Google Bard and Bing Chat to help you learn Python. Also, one important thing to keep in mind as we work with Gen AI tools, generative AI often makes mistakes. Code and explanations could be wrong, so it's important that you verify these using other sources.